In Malawi, a press briefing by the Center for Democracy and Economic Development Initiatives, better known as CDEDI, has ignited a storm of debate. At the center of it all is Sylvester Namiwa, a fiery civil society leader who is never afraid to speak truth to power. Standing before journalists, he made a pointed demand. Former President Peter Mutharika should be questioned about his record, particularly allegations of financial irregularities and possible misuse of state resources during his time in office. The words were sharp, the timing intentional. Malawi, still navigating its fragile democratic path, now faces a defining test. Should an ex-president be above scrutiny, or does accountability extend even to those who once held the highest office? In today's deep dive, we'll break down 10 critical facts surrounding this press briefing, each one unpacking the legal, political, and societal weight of Namiwa's demand. From questions of immunity and governance to public reaction, institutional pressure, and the broader implications for Malawi's democratic future, this is not just a story about one man, but about the system itself. Let's begin with the first fact. Who exactly is Namiwa, and why is his demand making so many waves? At the heart of the CDEDI press briefing is Sylvester Namiwa, the executive director of the Center for Democracy and Economic Development Initiatives. To understand the storm around his remarks, you must first understand Namiwa himself. Known for his uncompromising stance on issues of governance and accountability, he has built a reputation as a watchdog, unafraid to challenge authority, whether that authority wears a minister's suit or a president's title. In the briefing, Namiwa's language was deliberate. He insisted that Peter Mutharika, Malawi's former head of state, should not be immune from questioning over allegations linked to the management of state resources during his presidency. Specifically, CDEDI raised concerns that funds earmarked for development projects and public services may have been misused, misallocated, or poorly accounted for under Mutharika's administration. This is no small demand. In Malawi, former presidents occupy a symbolic space, respected by some, shielded by traditions of deference, and yet simultaneously scrutinized by citizens who have endured corruption scandals and broken promises. For Namiwa to stand at a press podium and demand direct questioning of Mutharika was a bold move, one that instantly thrust the press briefing into headlines. Supporters of CDEDI argue that this is the natural course of a maturing democracy. No leader, past or present, should be untouchable. They point to democratic principles where accountability does not expire once a leader steps down. Critics, however, see Namiwa's statements as politically charged, accusing CDEDI of being a tool of government rivals staging press conference activism rather than pursuing evidence-based accountability. The polarization is striking. On one side, civil society groups and sections of the public welcome Namiwa's courage, seeing him as a voice for ordinary Malawians frustrated by decades of elite impunity. On the other hand, loyalists to Mutharika's Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, accuse CDEDI of being a tool of government rivals, staging press conference activism rather than pursuing evidence-based accountability. What cannot be ignored, however, is that Namiwa has once again succeeded in shifting the conversation. By naming names and refusing to mince words, he has forced Malawians to confront a difficult truth. If democracy means equality before the law, then even the most powerful must answer questions. But naming names is only the beginning. The real test lies in the legal minefield ahead, because when it comes to former presidents, immunity and accountability clash head-on. And that brings us to fact 2. Once Sylvester Namiwa dropped Peter Mutharika's name at the CDEI press briefing, the spotlight shifted instantly to Malawi's legal framework. Can a former president actually be questioned? Or does immunity still apply once they've left office? The answer is far from straightforward, and that's what makes this debate so explosive. Under Malawi's constitution, a sitting president enjoys wide-ranging immunity from prosecution, ensuring that no criminal or civil proceedings can distract them from governing. The logic is clear. A leader should focus on running the state, not on fighting lawsuits. But what happens once that leader leaves office? The Constitution offers less clarity, leaving room for interpretation and political maneuvering. Some legal experts argue that while immunity protects sitting presidents, it does not provide a lifetime shield once their term ends. By that reading, Mutharika, as a private citizen, can indeed be called in for questioning if there is credible evidence of wrongdoing. Civil society groups like CDEDI champion this view, framing it as the cornerstone of accountability. No one is above the law, they insist, not even those who once held the highest title in the land. But others take a more cautious stance. They argue that pursuing former presidents without ironclad evidence risks politicizing the justice system. If every leader who leaves office is immediately investigated by opponents, the presidency itself could be undermined, creating a cycle of revenge politics. Mutharika supporters lean heavily on this argument, portraying calls for questioning as thinly veiled political persecution. This tension between immunity and accountability is not unique to Malawi. Around the world, democracies struggle with the same question. Should leaders be held accountable to set a precedent, or should they be protected to preserve political stability? In South Africa, Jacob Zuma's corruption trials created both outrage and precedent. In Kenya, former leaders often face scrutiny, but rarely prosecution. Malawi now finds itself grappling with its own version of this global dilemma. At the press briefing, Namiwa leaned firmly on the side of accountability, dismissing claims of immunity as an outdated excuse for impunity. His message was clear. If Malawi's democracy is to mean anything, its laws must reach everyone equally. But laws and constitutions only set the framework. The real battlefield is public opinion. And after this press briefing, the Malawian media and citizens had plenty to say. That's where fact 3 comes in. In Malawi, press briefings do not exist in a vacuum. Once Sylvester Namiwa made his statement, the story leapt instantly into the media bloodstream. Television networks replayed clips of him standing at the podium, his voice firm as he demanded accountability. Radio talk shows buzzed with callers debating whether Peter Mutharika should be summoned. Social media, as always, turned into a digital battleground, with hashtags and memes flying in both directions. Public opinion split sharply. On one side were those who praised Namiwa's courage. "This is the Malawi we want," one caller declared on a popular FM station. "If you let us, you must explain how you used our money." For many ordinary citizens who have long lived with the burden of economic hardship, the idea of holding the powerful accountable resonated deeply. They saw Namiwa's demand not just as an attack on Mutharika, but as a symbolic strike against decades of unpunished corruption. On the other side, Mutharika's loyalists went on the defensive. Spokespeople for the Democratic Progressive Party dismissed CDE's statement as political theater, accusing Namiwa of being aligned with rival interests. On Facebook, one supporter commented, "This is nothing but a smear campaign. The man is respected and they know it. They want to destroy him ahead of elections." The press itself, interestingly, took varied positions. Some outlets emphasized the democratic importance of questioning leaders, framing the event as a milestone in civic activism. Others approached it cautiously, highlighting the risks of destabilization if the legal system appears weaponized. In a country where media houses often walk a tightrope between independence and political influence, coverage of Namiwa's statement reflected the deep divisions in Malawian society. The global press also took note. Regional outlets in southern Africa picked up the story, pointing to Malawi as another country wrestling with the balance between respect for former leaders and demands for accountability. For international observers, the issue was less about one ex-president and more about what Malawi's handling of this moment reveals about the strength of its democratic institutions. At the heart of this storm lies one undeniable truth. the media shapes how people interpret events. Whether Malawians see Namiwa's demand as justice or vendetta depends largely on how headlines frame it and how conversations spiral in homes, markets, and online spaces. And those conversations don't just echo on social media. They eventually put pressure on the institutions that matter most. Which brings us straight into fact 4, the judiciary and law enforcement now caught in the crossfire. When Sylvester Namiwa made his demand at the CDEDI press briefing, he wasn't just addressing Peter Mutharika. He was indirectly throwing the challenge at Malawi's judiciary and law enforcement agencies. After all, civil society can raise questions, but only state institutions can enforce accountability. And that is where the tension now lies. Will the courts and investigators act, or will they retreat into silence? The judiciary in Malawi has long been viewed as a crucial pillar of democracy, but also one that struggles with perceptions of inconsistency. High-profile cases often stall for years, either bogged down by endless appeals or disrupted by accusations of political interference. Critics worry that if Mutharika is questioned, the case could drag on endlessly, ultimately eroding public trust further. For law enforcement, the dilemma is even sharper. The Malawi Police Service and the Anti-Corruption Bureau, ACB, would likely take the lead in any investigation, but these agencies operate under tight political scrutiny. Move too aggressively, and they risk being accused of witch hunts. Move too cautiously, and they appear complicit in protecting the powerful. It's a lose-lose scenario unless they can demonstrate clear independence backed by credible evidence. Observers note that Namiwa's demand essentially corners these institutions. The public is now watching closely, expecting some form of response. If the judiciary and ACB ignore the calls, critics will accuse them of shielding elites. If they act without airtight proof, they could destabilize the political landscape, fueling claims that justice is being manipulated for political ends. This pressure has already manifested in subtle ways. Legal experts have begun offering interpretations on national TV, explaining how immunity might or might not apply. Former judges have weighed in, urging caution but acknowledging that accountability cannot simply be avoided forever. Civil society organizations are amplifying the message, calling for transparency, audits, and investigations. The ball is no longer in Namiwa's court. It has rolled directly into the hands of institutions whose credibility is fragile but crucial. For Malawi, this is a test of whether the rule of law is genuine or conditional, applied equally or selectively. And when institutions feel the heat, politics inevitably enters the equation. Because in Malawi, legal questions often double as political battles. That sets the stage for Fact 5. The high-stakes power plays now swirling around Mutharika's name. In Malawi, every legal question quickly becomes a political calculation. The CDEDI press briefing may have raised matters of law, but make no mistake, politics is at the center of the storm. Peter Mutharika is not just a retired leader enjoying quiet years. He remains an influential figure in the Democratic Progressive Party and a symbolic rallying point for his supporters. Any move to question or charge him automatically reverberates through the political system. For the governing party, the stakes are high. Allowing a former president to be questioned could project strength and a commitment to accountability, something many Malawians crave. But it also risks inflaming the DPP's base, who will frame it as persecution of their leader. That backlash could destabilize parliament, complicate coalitions, and even shift voter sentiment ahead of elections. For the DPP, defending Mutharika becomes both a duty and a political strategy. Casting him as a victim of civil society attacks allows the party to energize its base and distract from its own internal divisions. Every attack on Mutharika can be repurposed into a rallying cry. They are coming after us, not just him. In that sense, Namiwa's demand feeds directly into the DPP's narrative of resistance. Other political actors are watching carefully. Rival parties may seize the moment to amplify the accountability message, but they must tread cautiously to avoid appearing opportunistic. Civil society leaders, meanwhile, know they walk a fine line. Push too hard, and they risk being accused of political bias. Push too softly, and their credibility fades. The dynamic creates a political chessboard where every piece matters. Mutharika himself may choose silence, projecting dignity in the face of criticism, or he may go on the offensive, accusing his critics of vendettas. Each move shapes not only his legacy, but also the trajectory of the opposition movement he still influences. Ultimately, this isn't just about one man's accountability. It's about Malawi's broader struggle with how politics and justice intersect. When leaders become symbols, holding them to account becomes as much about optics as it is about evidence. And speaking of evidence, politics can only carry the story so far. At some point, it all boils down to one key question. What exactly are the allegations, and what money trails are we really talking about? That's the heart of Fact 6. At the center of Sylvester Namiwa's demand is the issue of alleged misuse of public funds during Peter Mutharika's presidency. While the CDEDI press briefing did not present a courtroom-ready docket of evidence, it raised pressing questions that cannot be ignored. These allegations are not new, but bringing them back into the spotlight reignites a debate Malawi has wrestled with for years. Did taxpayer money truly serve the people, or was it siphoned off through questionable projects and unaccounted expenditures? Some of the claims revolve around incomplete infrastructure projects, initiatives launched with fanfare but left unfinished despite full budget allocations, roads half-built, hospitals that never opened, schools announced but never constructed. For many Malawians, these are not abstract numbers. They are lived realities, reminders of promises that fizzled after consuming millions in funds. There are also suspicions tied to procurement contracts, where companies with political connections allegedly secured lucrative deals with inflated costs. Critics argue that such contracts drained resources that could have been directed towards essential services like healthcare and education. CDEDI's message was simple. Those who approved and benefited from such deals must account for every kwacha. Adding fuel to the fire are reports of unexplained wealth among political elites during Mutharika's tenure. Civil society organizations highlight instances where assets and lifestyles of certain officials seemed wildly disproportionate to their official incomes. While not direct proof of corruption, these disparities raise red flags and justify calls for closer scrutiny. Mutharika's defenders reject these claims outright, framing them as recycled accusations weaponized for political gain. They argue that development projects were derailed by broader economic challenges, donor funding shortfalls, and global crises, not corruption. They also warn against conflating administrative inefficiencies with criminal misconduct. What makes Namiwa's press briefing impactful is that it didn't claim to have all the answers, it demanded them. By asking why funds disappeared, why projects stalled, and why accountability never materialized, CDEDI effectively put pressure on institutions to dig deeper. In a country where financial scandals have often faded without resolution, the demand struck a nerve. For citizens living without reliable electricity, struggling hospitals, and dilapidated schools, the questions feel personal. No matter how fiery the press briefing, allegations must eventually pass the test of evidence. This is why Sylvester Namiwa and CDEDI emphasized not just naming Peter Mutharika, but also calling for transparency and thorough investigations. Without that, the demand risks being dismissed as mere political noise. In Malawi, the gold standard for accountability is a forensic audit. Civil society groups are pushing for independent auditors, preferably with international oversight, to comb through records from Mutharika's administration. The goal is to verify whether funds earmarked for development projects, procurement, and social programs were properly spent.
If discrepancies are found, investigators would then need to establish whether they stemmed from mismanagement, incompetence, or outright corruption. The challenge is enormous. Government record keeping is often patchy, and in some cases, documents conveniently go missing when scandals erupt. Former officials may be reluctant to cooperate, and institutions tasked with investigating often face resource shortages or political pressure. This raises the fear that even if an inquiry begins, it could stall halfway, leaving the public with more questions than answers. Transparency is not only about audits, it is also about communication. CDEDI insists that Malawians deserve regular updates, not opaque promises. In a country where citizens have seen too many scandals swept under the rug, trust depends on visible progress. For example, naming the officials under review, publishing preliminary findings, and openly discussing timelines would go a long way in restoring credibility. The question of independence looms large. Can Malawi's Anti-Corruption Bureau, ACB, conduct this work free from political influence? Will Parliament back an inquiry without partisan interference? And if international partners are brought in, will their findings be respected or quietly shelved? Namiwa's central point is clear. The pursuit of evidence is not just about Mutharika, it's about setting a precedent. If one former president can be questioned, others will know they too may face the same standard. This is what makes the press briefing more than a soundbite. It's a push for systemic change. But investigations without urgency risk fading into endless delays. And that's why timelines, deadlines, and public pressure become weapons in the fight for accountability. Let's unpack fact 8.
In politics, timing is everything. Sylvester Namiwa knew this when he set a deadline during the CDEDI press briefing. Within 30 days, Peter Mutharika should provide answers. On the surface, it sounds like a simple countdown. In reality, it is a calculated move designed to prevent this issue from fading into the background noise of Malawian politics. Deadlines serve two functions. First, they create urgency. When the public knows there is a fixed period for action, anticipation builds, and pressure on institutions intensifies. Second, deadlines expose avoidance. If the 30 days pass with silence, the lack of response becomes newsworthy in itself, casting doubt on both Mutharika and the institutions tasked with oversight. But deadlines in the political legal space collide with reality. Investigations are notoriously slow. Audits take months, sometimes years. Gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and securing court approvals all stretch the timeline far beyond 30 days. Critics argue that by setting such a short deadline, CDEDI risks creating false expectations that may lead to public frustration when results inevitably lag. Namiwa's supporters counter that the 30-day demand is symbolic, not procedural. It is less about securing a full legal resolution in 1 month and more about forcing immediate acknowledgement from Mutharika. In other words, at least respond, address the allegations, and show willingness to engage. Silence, they argue, is no longer an option. History shows why urgency matters. Malawi has seen countless scandals where time became the shield of the powerful. The longer cases drag, the more public attention shifts, and the greater the chance that files quietly disappear or political deals sweep issues under the rug. Deadlines disrupt that cycle by keeping citizens engaged and institutions under pressure. Still, the balance between urgency and due process is delicate. If investigations are rushed, errors may occur, weakening any eventual prosecution. If they move too slowly, trust evaporates. That tension defines this moment. Civil society demanding speed, institutions urging patience, and the public caught in between. And when deadlines loom, citizens inevitably ask, do we trust the system to deliver? Which brings us straight into fact 9, the role of public trust, civil society, and Malawi's broader political culture. When Sylvester Namiwa raised his demand at the CDEDI press briefing, he wasn't only targeting Peter Mutharika, he was speaking directly to Malawians who have grown weary of promises without accountability. Public trust is the invisible currency of democracy, and in Malawi, that currency has been badly devalued over the years. For many citizens, corruption scandals, half-finished projects, and selective justice have eroded faith in institutions. Courts are seen as too slow, politicians as too self-serving, and oversight bodies as too vulnerable to interference. Against that backdrop, Namiwa's statement struck a chord precisely because it echoed the frustrations of ordinary Malawians. People want to believe that their voices matter, that even the most powerful can be held accountable if the public insists loudly enough. Civil society organizations like CDEDI play a crucial role in bridging the gap between citizens and institutions. They provide the megaphone, framing issues in language that resonates with the public and forcing elites to confront uncomfortable questions. But civil society itself must walk carefully. If it is seen as partisan, its credibility can quickly collapse. That is why Namiwa framed his demand not as a partisan attack, but as a test of Malawi's democracy itself. Political culture complicates this picture. Malawi's democracy is still relatively young, and deference to authority remains strong. Many citizens still see former leaders with respect, even reverence, making direct challenges to them risky. At the same time, younger generations, more vocal on social media, are less inclined to accept silence from those once in power. This generational divide shapes how Malawians interpret CDEDI's message, some as disrespectful provocation, others as long overdue accountability. Ultimately, the success or failure of Namiwa's demand will be measured not just in legal terms, but in cultural ones. Does the public believe that institutions can act fairly? Do they see accountability as possible, or do they dismiss it as political theater? In this sense, public trust becomes both the battlefield and the prize.